First, I think I'm breaking the chain this morning of the Wharton connection.
Really? I'm trying to figure, like, how did you get here?
I do have a PhD. It is in political science, though, so I might be in the wrong room, but I'm going to wing it, right? You know, so politics and marketing, there's a lot of overlap, and I've made my career in marketing sciences, so we'll talk forward. I was really fascinated to join this panel, just simply because Kantar, we sit kind of in the middle between the practitioners, industry, and the academics, right? And in many cases, we are reached out, our clients reach out to us mostly because they want it better, faster, stronger, but they look to us as being an innovation partner and to drive some of the latest thinking because frankly, their business is often to deliver product. And in our case, our business is to deliver this knowledge, this insights, analytic outputs, and the like. And meanwhile, we are also a business, though. And so we don't necessarily have the luxury of doing a lot of research on research. I mean, we've got to kind of make decisions as we go. We often leverage the academic literature and these sorts of conferences to generate and germinate ideas and then activate them in market. But ultimately, we're doing them, I would say, with one eye open and one eye closed, right? And so I look forward to this panel in that sense, right? Because this notion, as we think about AI, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we think about AI at Kantar, but this notion of the human factors, the human impact, is highly relevant, but often underevaluated. And I'll give an example. So at Kantar, we've got 3 areas that we typically are leveraging AI, and it's these are broad areas. So this is not necessarily an official mantra of what we're doing from an AI perspective, but if you think about it, I put it shared services. So HR support, finances, all the sort of connective tissue that sort of operate around the business. How can we leverage AI tools to support that, right? And increase workplace productivity. Now you're asking me, you're saying marketing science institute, why are you talking to me about shared services? Well, it is important to us because it's an incredible proving ground to understand both how our people interact with these AI technologies, as they sort of change the nature of workflows and processes. And it's also a proving ground for our programmers, for the people that get involved, that are sort of attacking these problems and sort of breaking them down and then sort of building them back up into leveraging sort of AI, algorithms and other sorts of solutions. So one is you have that proving ground. The second area that we focus on is workplace productivity, right? And you're saying, okay, what's the difference from shared services? I know Stefano asked me that exact question. This is in sort of the supply chain of the work that we do. This could be things like panel management, because the quality of our panel, the quality of the respondents that we speak to, there's a certain expectation in the marketplace that we must always meet, no matter what we do. Data handling. So Kantar is in a unique position. We create our own data. We have syndicated via surveys and the like on behalf of our clients. We have syndicated data, things where we go out to the marketplace and collect market facts in and of itself, just not talking to consumers per se, but collecting it, sometimes at point of sale and via other means. And then we're often expected to integrate first-party and third-party data on behalf of our clients and bridging all that together. Well, that's an exceptionally timely process. And if anybody's, I imagine a few of you have taken a look at the ecosystem of data partners that exist from a marketing and advertising standpoint, it's endless. And it's almost constant in terms of innovation. And so being able to have solutions in place that can readily read the data, output it into formats that are then usable for our solutions is an incredible process in and of itself. So we've really invested a lot of technology around platforming, around intelligent agents, and the ability to sort of work on behalf of our clients to integrate data from multiple sources in near real time. I'm gonna take a cue from Eric. It's not truly real time, but it gets there a whole lot faster than it used to, right? And so that's a critical area. And then the third area is our go-to-market, our commercial applications that we take to our clients. These are things like that build off our existing knowledge base. These are things like advances in creative testing. So Kantar, Millward Brown was once, a marquee brand within the Kantar portfolio. It's now part of it is now Kantar. But we've got a long heritage with doing creative testing. And through that creative testing, we absorbed a lot of knowledge about what people respond to. We have techniques, very sophisticated techniques, often influenced by academics like yourself in terms of how we do this. And so, we've been doing this for decades. And so now we can access that information, pull it up, and without actually tapping into a respondent, provide a very quick, within 15 minutes, a view as to how an ad might perform, given a specific, specifics around the channel that it'll be used in, whether it's a digital channel or a TV ad. I'm very intrigued by that. I forgot about how we might work in music from the presentation yesterday. That could be a really interesting one that we bring to bear there. We also leverage AI techniques to do campaign assessments. So Sachi earlier said brand lift studies. Well, that's a very common thing, but the causality is often missing. It's like, yeah, this works or it doesn't. Move on, and the optimization is kind of self-evident because there's a low cost of switching when you're doing it in digital means and the like. But oftentimes, there's heavy investment in terms of the overall campaign, in terms of the tonality, the feel, the concepts below it. And so understanding sort of the causal factors and being able to do so in near real time is absolutely critical. It's a critical function of us and a value that we deliver from a business standpoint. And we're even right now investigating, we're not quite there yet, of leveraging AI as a means to really sort of elevate our marketing mix modeling techniques. For a lot of the reasons that have been brought up, in terms of, I think, the causal inference aspects of it, the elements about stationarity, what are you measuring? Those are things we're still working through. We don't necessarily want the machines to tell us what to look at. We kind of want to be equal partners, at least in that conversation. But all of these things that I just said have huge implications for sort of the human interactions. And I'll use two examples and I'll turn it over to Shiri. One is when I talked about those shared services. So HR functions is one. HR functions and prioritization. So often, employees have needs, right? And they submit to this process, and we're now using, automation and AI techniques to sort of interact with the employees and help sort of solve often their issues, help to solve those issues. But part of that aspect is also prioritization. And so one of the things is AI agents don't have a really good sense for prioritization just yet, or they sort of need to be trained in that. Meanwhile, if I have an HR request, it's usually the most urgent thing on my plate that day, whether it's for me personally or for one of my members of the staff. And so what we're finding is that the level of adoption and acceptance is not been quite what we want, right, in terms of the response, in terms of the employee experience and everything else. So that's an area where we didn't really think through what the human factor might be. And so that's an area of learning that we're taking back. The other area, and I talked a little bit about when we go to market, is the integrity of our data when we run a survey is paramount. It's probably one of the top 3 reasons that somebody might do work with Kantar, right? Is because we can validate, we can verify who we're working with, our approaches, they're tried and true. We're a little bit more on the conservative side, so we're not doing a lot of wild, wacky stuff. And so it gives, that becomes a foundational point by which people would work with us. Now, I don't know if you know this, but there's a big business in sample provision. It is multiples of $1 billion business in terms of being able to provide people to participate in surveys. And so whenever you have that much money, there are avenues for fraudulent behaviors, whether it be via bots, whether it be individuals that are just sort of passing time and taking surveys and things along those lines. And so we have to control for those things. And oftentimes the way it's been done in the past is you evaluate your data and at the end, after collection, you strip out the bad data and you maybe go in and find new data, or sort of refill a little bit, or you might just say, hey, we can live with it. But that is costly. It's costly to us. There's lots of mistakes and everything. So building intelligent agents that are able to interact with respondents, understand sort of the tonality of their responses if there's verbatims, the temporal dimensions, how quickly they're sort of moving through, the nature and sort of the patterns of their responses. Using AI, you can very quickly identify what's a bot, what is sort of a fraudulent person, or what might be somebody who we want their responses, they're just a little fatigued. And so then you can put intelligent prompts. And instead of like saying, hey, we're watching you, it could be, did you know you could actually take the, you could actually come back to this survey later at another time. Or imagine this, adaptive techniques where you can actually say, oh, this person seems to be struggling with the nature of these questions, right? Let's move them to another part of the survey and see how things progress. Thus, sort of interacting and creating a new environment that actually can improve sort of that whole process of taking surveys. And that's a human effect. So that's an area where we did consider, hey, there are clear things that we need to resolve from a human factor standpoint. And I think, Shiri, your research really sort of can probably add a whole lot more context on that.
Yeah, so Shiri Melumad, I'm faculty here in the marketing department. Jessica was actually one of my students in my consumer behavior class. It's really nice to see you. Yeah, so one theme that's been sort of emerging among some of the speakers, including Jessica, is that context really matters when you're trying to interpret data, right? So where consumers' data is coming from actually can really alter the nature of that data. And so a lot of my research looks at how different technological devices can actually alter the nature of consumer data, right? So if I'm generating content, let's say on my phone versus PC, that actually can change the nature of my responses. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of my research in this area, and then Stefano will talk, and then we'll be open for questions, just to give a sense of the timeline. And so in one of my projects, I find that consumers are actually more willing to disclose intimate or personal information when it's elicited on their smartphones rather than their PCs. So I find this effect across a variety of different types of data. So for example, in one study, I analyzed reviews from TripAdvisor, and I find that reviews written by customers on their smartphones actually are more intimately revealing than those written by customers on their PCs. I also analyzed data on consumers' willingness to comply with requests for personal information in online advertisements. So think of, an ad that's asking you for your email address or for your date of birth or even for your substance abuse history. Those were all examples of ad campaigns in the data. And again, I'm finding that, when these ads are targeted to people on their phones, they're more willing to provide that type of information. I should say I'm hearing a lot about, RCT. So I am an experimentalist. I always complement any field data I analyze with actual controlled experiments. So I'm also finding this when I'm randomly assigning people to use their phone or their laptop to answer, let's say, sensitive questions in surveys. And so it turns out that, this is a multiply determined effect. There are a few explanations for this effect, but one of the reasons people are more disclosing on their phones is the highly personal nature of the device, right? So our phone is always with us. We tend to associate our phone with more personal activities like texting with friends and loved ones. We tend to associate our computer, on the other hand, with work, for example, right? I should say that in addition to smartphones, I'm also really interested in the use of voice technologies and how that can be altering the nature of consumer data. So in one paper of mine that recently came out, I look at how the way we search for information online actually differs depending on whether I'm typing into a Google search bar or I'm vocalizing my queries out loud to voice technology. So for example, Alexa is the obvious explanation that comes to mind, but I also look at the dictation add-on that you can add on the Google search bar, right? So you speak and your query is automatically transcribed in the search bar. And so what I find, I'm super excited about this paper. So what I find is that unlike with typing, we tend to worry more about our words being misunderstood or mistranscribed when we're interacting with voice technology, right? And so as a consequence, we actually end up pausing and thinking through how we want to phrase ourselves before we indicate our query out loud. And so because I'm thinking more about what I want to convey in my query, I end up providing a more detailed and specific description of what I'm looking for relative to when I type a query. So just to concretize this, think of the difference between a typed query saying like best sneakers, whereas a spoken query is more likely to say best Nike sneakers for running under $100. So I see more references to brand names in spoken queries, I see more references to usage contexts, and I see more references to cost. And so importantly, I also find that this greater specificity of spoken queries actually yields Google search returns that people are more satisfied with compared to the vaguer typed queries. And then last paper I'll share in this area too is I'm interested in how the choices we make differ depending on whether I'm vocalizing them to voice technology versus manually interacting with the computer. So for example, using a mouse to click on my choice. And I find that, for example, consumers are actually willing to pay more to avoid choosing a brand with an embarrassing name when they say choices out loud to voice technology than when they click on their choices. So I could go on, but I don't want to bogart this conversation. I'll let Stefano take it away now.
Thank you, Shiri, and thank you, John, and the whole MSI team for having me on this panel. It's a delight to be here. It's a great conference. And the question is, why would you have a behavioral scientist in a conference about data streams and analytics, a very technical kind of subject? And I think there is hopefully a reason to do that. And when you think about companies struggling to integrate new data streams, struggling to develop the infrastructure that those data streams require in terms of storage, sensing, and then everything that needs to come after that, from the algorithms that you need to deploy in order to use, and the whole like supply chain that Patrick described. It is easy for companies to be caught in these technical problems because it's such a big problem, obviously, so new, and tend to lose track a little bit of maybe the reason why we're doing this. And as a person interested in consumer decision making, I think it's very important to keep in mind the decisions and the people. So the problem is if you focus so much on the technique, what they can do, the capabilities, and the barriers that need to be overcome in order to use it. The danger is that you end up in a mindset where basically you say, I've got data, do something. And really, the problem shouldn't be framed like that, because the problem should be, I've got a problem, do something. I've got a problem to solve, a decision to make, and what data do I need in order to make that decision the best I can? And to make one concrete example of that distinction, the danger could be that you end up basically trying to find a purpose for data rather than trying to find data for a particular purpose, which maybe will be different data than the one that you have, or even answering the wrong question. So maybe take, for example, in a context like advertising, we are obsessing with predicting behavior, for example, who's going to click. But really the problem of advertising is the problem of incrementality. It's not about understanding who's going to click. It's understanding for whom a particular message is going to have the biggest effect on the likelihood. So that's a very different problem. And for that, you might not, be able to answer that question with the data just lying around. So that's on one aspect. Just never forget why you're doing something. What are the decisions that drive business? What kind of data can really help doing that? And then on the second aspect, the people, not only understanding the capabilities of those technologies, but the psychological barriers to adoption, the interpretations that people may make. Patrick was mentioning about that too, and the behaviors that technology can trigger, like Shiri was talking about. And you can see from Shiri's research just how many exciting research questions for behavioral scientists interested in technology there are today. It's just, I think, endless. You can write, a book full of just research ideas of what you could do. And now, take for example HR. Patrick mentioned that in HR you have this issue where, the algorithms are being deployed, but there's some issues of acceptance, some issues of adoption. And understanding those are going to be crucial for this technology to be any helpful, because if decision support systems are there but nobody uses them, it's like they were not there. And so understanding the psychology of adoption is going to be crucial for any technology, including analytics and new data. And with regard to HR, just make one example from a new paper of mine. We have a working paper where we're looking at people's lay beliefs about HR systems AI systems in recruiting and selection. And people have these stereotypes about technology. Technology can think but cannot feel. Technology is very good at analytical tasks but cannot really understand people and interpersonal kind of issues. And so because of that, there is a spillover from the adoption of technology to the beliefs about the people who get recruited through that technology. So we find that if you tell some people working in a company, your new colleagues have been hired through a AI-driven selection system, they'll assume that they have bad interpersonal skills. They will assume they have good analytical skills, so they can think, but you probably don't want to have them interacting with a client who knows what they're going to do. It's kind of weird, but if people hold those beliefs, understanding those beliefs is going to be crucial for those systems to move the needle. So the systems are great, but in the end, it's about people. And so unless you keep that in mind and understanding the context, like Shiri and Patrick were saying about the deployment of technology, you might stumble. And this was just like a little kickoff, and now we would like to open up and use this time together to address your questions.
Shiri, can I ask you something about obtuse requests, where you don't quite know what you want to search for, and very often when you type it in, those auto-completion things actually give you a really good indication of what is it I'm looking for, right? So do you see an interaction aspect about the area that you really want to ask about, how much knowledge, prior knowledge and experience is coming in, and how that ultimately informs customer satisfaction?
That's really interesting, right? So my data is all based on experiments. So I assume that randomization worked, and there's going to be, people who are more or less knowledgeable in both conditions. But something I think is a little spin on what you're saying that I've been thinking about is, when I'm interacting with voice technology and I'm thinking more about what I want to say, at times it might artificially lead me to a level of specificity that maybe is unnecessary and actually ends up limiting my exposure to, let's say, brands I wouldn't have otherwise considered.
Exactly.
So I've definitely been thinking about that,
Have you looked at the effect of age or age groups in terms of preference for like the phone versus the computer?
So the short answer is you can't not consider that variable. And coming back to ideas of data quality, I can't control who participates, let's say, in an online panel that I'm recruiting from. And so I didn't have all that much variance in age, just naturally I didn't. But you could imagine that older cohorts would probably not be comfortable using their phone at all, let alone disclosing personal information on their phone, whereas younger folks, like the undergrads I teach, are disclosing all the time on their phones. Shocking rates, yeah.
I've seen a new paper out of a research team in Switzerland that they analyze the way that people speak to those voice-activated devices like Alexa and so on. And they were arguing that there are really two ways of talking to these things. One is to ask a question and say, could you please tell me the weather? And the other one is an injunction, say, what's the weather? And apparently the big predictor of what you use, which type of approach you use, is age. And all the people are polite. They invite Alexa to help them. They thank them, while the young people are
That's very true. I have a very young son, and he's raised in this AI world, and his interactions with Alexa are very demanding. And I'm like, hey Alexa, will you please play? It's a
As long as he doesn't speak to you that way, that's good.
Their days.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a more academic kind of question. It's really fascinating about the voice versus typing. I have two alternative explanations. One is effort, because it's so much easier for me to speak long sentences whereas I'm typing there. Another one is familiarity, because we've been searched for over how many years since Google started? Whereas voice, it's recent years until today, I still don't feel very familiar with the voice. If I'm not familiar, I may into the sense they may get it or I may not get it right. So I've been giving more details and long sentences. So any thoughts on that?
Yes, great questions. So in terms of effort with respect to the length, right, it's easier to speak longer sentences than to type. I think it's an empirical question, the extent to which that's true, right? People type very long things with ease all the time, on their computers at least. But you know, I get it, certain measures of capturing like a degree of forethought prior to generating the query, so there's some empirical evidence for that. What I wish I had that I don't is timestamps. So I wasn't able to capture like how long they were on the page before typing their query or indicating their query, which would have been like an even more objective measure of forethought. So that's to the first question, and then the second question is familiarity, for sure. The data that I have in my experiments that captures how familiar they are with the technology didn't seem to moderate, but of course, people who are less familiar with the technology are likely to pause even longer before speaking relative to people. Although the opposite prediction could be made too, where it's like, I'm very familiar with this technology, I know how much it messes up, and I know how much forethought I need to give. So it could actually potentially go either way.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Ryan Hayes with Adobe. So do you see any examples like firms or government organizations, things like that are doing a really good job at using behavioral science with data, other than Vanguard, of course? Yeah, because it seems like something that could be very behind the scenes and hard to like get a sense of like what good looks like, just outside looking in, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, they're looking at me like, are we doing that great at Kantar? In terms of in comment, I would just say that, from my experiences, and it's not just limited to my current employer, but we do a very good job, or I think we've made a lot of progress in terms of bringing those two things together. But I think it sounds like the nature of your question is like, sort of examining those things in concert with one another. And so we're always left with that, modeling there's always a little bit of perspective that goes into making those choices. And so when we bridge two data sources that are not exact together, I mean, we've got to make some assumptions versus the ability to look at something full rank. So I'm not familiar with anyone that's really sort of crossed that gap, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I think it's hard to do, and I think it's really important. And I think I make an example of a new research project. I haven't written it up yet, but we have some very cool data. I'm really excited about this. And it's about understanding the interplay between human and machine cognition. So we know from behavioral science that the way you visit preferences shapes the preferences you express. And so take, for example, the cold start problem in recommendations. You don't know what to recommend to this person because you haven't seen them before. So you go on Netflix and you make a new account. They'll ask you which of these 100 movies you like. And so you start expressing those preferences, and the algorithm will learn something about you and will start making recommendations. What we know from behavioral science is the way you're going to elicit those preferences at the start is going to have an effect on what they say. So we have one study where we coded our own platform, and we have a recommender system that basically is going to start making recommendations after you expressed some initial preferences. And we leverage default effects, which are very famous, kind of like a nudging type of technique, where you say, okay, here's 15 topics, and in half of the participants are randomly assigned to start with all of them ticked, and you untick those you don't like. And the other half are randomly assigned to be all unticked, you tick the ones that you like. And of course, in the second one, you end up with much fewer categories ticked than the first. That teaches the algorithm something about the person, calibrates the learning parameters and the recommendation that you get. And those recommendations are different, and they in turn shape the consumption. And so even many videos later, you still see that the starting point has this kind of like pathway that brings them in a different direction. So I think we really need to bring behavioral scientists and consumer scientists in the same room, because I think you're not going to have a good understanding of how these algorithms are shaping behavior unless it's there.
You can also take Ryan's question and ask the room full of industry folks what they think the answer is to as well. Ryan, do you want to repeat your question?
Yeah, so who out here is doing a great job with combining behavioral science kind of theory with analytics and AI, more technical practices, other than Vanguard, of course, which is at the forefront of all this that like we learned yesterday.
I have one question regarding statistics. You said that we all know that many times when we are running survey, how many people are actually genuinely answering that, how many people are just, even if you incentivize them to do that. Have you ever thought about this technology? Like in literature, it says that pupil dilation has a link with our emotions, right? So when I'm writing, so we all have camera and on our phone. So when I'm answering a survey, I gotta be turning on my camera, and you can track my pupil dilation. So when I'm answering that, I'm extremely satisfied with that. I cannot fake my emotions and answer that. Any thoughts on that kind of approach of combining?
I think our neuroscientist and his team have planted you here to sort of. We have conversations about that. I mean, the challenge again. I go back to it's an excuse to some degree, but we're a business, right? And so some elements of this is some of these things they seem like small improvements, but they are logistical challenges, right? And so. We live in this world where it's like trying to navigate those two functions. But yeah, I mean, that's an area that we're deeply interested in. I mean, the other one that I'm very interested in is, I didn't mention it, we've got a capability, I'll call it social listening, and we call it DX, digital experience. Digital X is really meant to cover a lot of things. But in essence, the listening aspect of it is we're able to cast a wide net, just like a lot of other providers that look at reviews, forums, search behaviors, social media activities, and really it's meant to gin up what are some of the hot topics, or we have a client that has a specific question, and to really get the organic response around that. And it can feed innovation, you feed all other sources. Now the secret sauce for us that we believe is really in sort of the algorithms that we use to sort of manufacture the insights. Right, which is to be able to sort of pull that in and broaden it. But the questions that it raises and some of the things that we talk about is if you go to a special topic forum, you get deep, almost emotional level responses on things versus search behaviors is like you're lucky if it's grammatically correct, right? And it's the one line and everything else. And I guess one of the questions that I have also is like, hey, as we move into more vocal, where that becomes sort of more scalable and able to do, be intelligent agents and the like. Voice conversation is filled with intonation. It's emotive, right? And like 80% of what we do is emotion, and then we rationalize after the fact. Versus writing is a very rational sort of behavior, often, right? And so how will that ultimately change? How we understand consumers, how we interpret what seems like a rational response, but if it's said with a very high octave or very low octave, how do we interpret that? And do we draw distinctions between, respondents who might have the same responses, but very different sort of emotive aspects to it? And so, that's kind of a critical thing in terms of, how do we manage across these, for us, it always boils down to, how do we collect data better and expand sort of our understanding and then be able to sort of interpret that for the benefit of our clients. And so, we're excited, or I'm always excited by these multiple modes, but at the same time, it creates a whole host of questions that are much, potentially challenging to resolve.
Just to build on that, and this is for any one of you, what about the economics of all of this? And with some of the work that you're all doing, do bring in the economic factor of what it would cost to gather that data, maintain the data, and that's putting aside even like the privacy aspect of it. But like Patrick, what we were just talking about, and the different examples that Shiri and Stefano did. I'm not saying you're not thinking about it, but does it not come into play at this point? But I know a lot of the practitioners, certainly the CIOs, are thinking, oh my God, more data, how are we going to maintain it? And is it just for a couple months, or is this, how does that play into some of the decision making? Is the economics of collecting data and then putting it in the cloud and making sure it's.
Yeah, for us, the risk of not moving is much greater than the risk of of moving, right? Like of doing it, right? And so there's a huge cost associated with transforming systems, how you think about the data. I mean, the one thing we haven't really talked is when you change modes of data collection, it requires you to revisit sort of all the insights that you've been producing, backcasting, forecasting, and the like. And so that's an economic cost that is usually unaccounted for early in the process until later you go, oops, our tracking information looks very different for PepsiCo or for whomever. And that creates a whole host of challenges. At the same time, though, not moving fast, we're not meeting the needs of the marketplace. We're increasingly being told we need insights faster, we need better quality, right? Which is a lot of times taking the human element out of it. And frankly, we need you to go deeper. And so with all the modes of data that's collected and everything that we got to sift through, in order to achieve that, we've got to lean in on the technology or risk being overlapped.
I think the idea that behavioral insights can be helping the analytics process doesn't have to cost anything, in the sense that you will design interfaces. It's just a matter of thinking about what the interface is. For example, I made with the recommender system, you're going to have to show this information somehow to these people, so it's not like it's going to cost you more, but just at least consciously design these things such that you understand what effect it may have on people. So to some extent, it's an issue of awareness and just thinking.
Relatedly, determining whether data came from someone's phone or voice technology or PC should be free, right? As long as you have it in the data, it should be easy to analyze it.
I don't know.
You need to choose someone.
Yes. I was curious, this is sort of building off Ryan's point and also what Professor Puntoni you mentioned. Why do you think there is such a struggle for businesses to find buy-in for behavioral scientists, given that there's so much scope in terms of like your quality of insights being better if you have behavioral scientists sort of, working on like debiasing the quality of data, among other things?
Well, that's a hard question, right? Like, I think behavioral science. I think that we're seeing a trend of increased understanding and respect and actually accommodation of behavioral sciences, at least in the industry. I'm in the knowledge and insights industry, so I think there's an appreciation there. I don't think it says there's meat and potatoes, right? In our world, it's survey research and the analytics assigned to it. Some of the marketing science wrappers around it. And so it's, in some cases, we have behavioral scientists, just like we have neuroscientists that sort of engage and make us smarter and do a lot of really cool work. But it's figuring out how to scale, often from a business standpoint. That's where the challenge lies.
And I think sometimes the job profiles are not very clear. I think, it's an issue of pipeline matching, campaigning, and how do you advertise a position? What is the position even? How do you take this person into the data team? Everything we should learn. I expect a few years from now, things will be a little bit more, I don't say standardized.
Yeah, I can add quickly about that question, also related to Adobe's question. In the past, we run RCTs, serious RCTs, using AI chatbot for solving some problem. I think we do need a behavioral theory. The reason is a lot of pushback for the technology. Like the company they roll out the AI chatbot is working past Turing test, and they can call customer. A customer do not notice that's a bot. They thought it's a human agent, right? So it turns out the customer has a right to know. Once they know it's bot, 80% of the customer will not buy from the company. So that's definitely we need to understand why. And then we went through the survey of the customers, and the customer reported that if I knew this is a bot calling me, selling me something, I do not feel comfortable. I think it's not empathetic to my needs, right? Because that's an interpersonal in-group, out-group thing up there. Second part is about the HR application. So the company was really successful rolling out the HR bot, and they be able to fire 60% of call center employees. Now they have faced a different problem. So how can they retain all these employees, right? So then what they did is what if I use the AI chatbot to train those less skilled employees? Right? So because the AI chatbot, they know the knowledge bank, now I use the knowledge graph to train these lower skills employees. So that's really working out for the company, so then they can do cross-selling, upselling, a lot of opportunities. Those are behavioral theory tells the company they see that especially those algorithm aversion come from the customers, also come from the employees. So just give them the right training, the benefits, and then they adopt. Is a win-win-win situation. Better for the customer, better for the employee, and more profit for the company.
I think there's our professional identity is very important to us, and deployment of technology can be very threatening because it's a cue for maybe the obsolescence of your skills, or because it's a cue for the uniqueness of your knowledge, or the centrality of your work, or simply you find it threatening as a human being to be maybe facing now a computer that can do things you thought only you could. So I think giving a lot of thought to how you communicate about technology, whether it is to colleagues or maybe clients too, I think it's going to be quite important. And oftentimes it's just a matter of time.
I wanted to kind of refer to Ryan's question, and then Shiri asked the industry to also speak up. So here's our point of view. So we've used behavioral science mostly as a sort of at a meta learning level. So learn the main principles applied to content creation for communication, some other aspects, but it's been more sort of in the creation part, not in the measurement part. And I would say that so we are not very advanced in that kind of embedding it in analytics. So specifically what I mean by that is, let's say we heard about an algorithm which can give you almost a set of numbers and classify, let's say, creatives into informative versus social versus one other grouping. And can you also have can you get a score for, let's say, how close is this on behavioral science metrics? Like, is it compliant or not? So since we don't have that, we use it in the qualitative space to inform. And in practice, how that works is that we get in senior practitioners. We work with Yale before, and we work with an agency called Depot in Europe before. So they would come in and do a training, and that would last for as long as our team holds together, because we're sort of familiar with, let's say, the top 30 biases and theories that are there which apply to us. But then if we really wanted to go deep, then we would use an agency to do an audit of the creatives that are already on there, whether our shelves make sense, some principles apply there too, and so on. So it would be a bit of an audit. So I'm meaning to say that it's not embedded in any quantitative process, but it's more a qualitative exercise. I think we're done. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, it's time for some thank yous here. I guess at the top of my thank you list, who are the speakers who are still here? Can you put up your hands for the people that are? Okay. Yes. Thank you so much for the speakers. Why we do this because of the conversation that we're having and the fact that we have this between the academics and the industry people. So we're so grateful to everybody here who participated in the conversation to co-create kind of the experience that you all had over the last couple of days. And by the way, thank you also just by the way for giving us your feedback on the conference, as it affects kind of what we do going forward here. It has been such a pleasure to work with the Wharton team on this thing, working with Raghu and with Eric and Mary and all the people on their team, Lauren and so on. They got a big team on their side, so thank you so much for your work. Mary, thank you for suggesting this a year ago when we were at the conference in Chicago. And then just on my side, like the MSI people, here's our team over here. MSI people, hands up, all you guys. Yeah. Team members right behind me.
is having a birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday. Thanks so much for all the insights that you contribute in this thing, and that we look forward to continuing to interact with you, some of you on the MMM, et cetera. But thank you, thank you, thank you. Really enjoyed it so much. Thanks.